Welcome back to Serious Talk, Salesforce at Scale. I'm 𝗁𝗍𝗍𝗄, your host. Thanks for coming along with me today. If you've ever watched a flawless technical build stall the moment real people had to use it, this one might be for you. My guest is 𝗂𝗏𝗏 of 𝗂𝗏𝗏 Coaching, who spent 15 years consulting, moved into internal IT leadership, and now coaches experts on how to become leaders without losing themselves in the process. We get practical about a few things: why deep expertise can quietly become a blind spot, how to align people on the why before you touch the technology, what the 3 laws of performance mean for adoption, and how to think about AI as an invitation rather than a threat to your job. Let's get into it. Welcome to Serious Talk, Salesforce at Scale. Glad to have a friend and confidant here, 𝗂𝗏𝗏 with 𝗂𝗏𝗏 Coaching on the show today. Aaron, good to have you here.
Hi, Greg. It's good to be here today.
Awesome. So this particular series, Salesforce at Scale, the idea behind it came from my experience. I spent about 15 years overseeing an org. And what I learned is it didn't matter what we did with technology. If we didn't do things about the people that were going to use the platform, if we didn't engage them, if we didn't train them, if we didn't do some of these things that people inevitably need to be successful, the technical things we did really did matter. You cannot compensate for a disenfranchised user or anything like that, which led me to kind of having a conversation with you about people, about change, about integrity, not as in I can't trust you, but just really having somebody meaningfully engaged in a process, whether it's software implementation or just in doing their day job, right? So it led us to have a great conversation that I thought would be relevant for our audience today. So I appreciate you taking the time to get with us.
Appreciate you having me on. I enjoy visiting with like-minded leaders about this, and especially in the business and the software space.
Fantastic. So why don't you give us a little bit of background? Neither one of us are teenagers. We've been doing some things. Tell me a little bit about your background and what led you into the world of coaching.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually started my early days as a creative, as a musician. By the time I was entering college and the workforce, I ended up choosing IT, much to, I think, everyone's surprise around me. But at the end of the day, I didn't want to end up being a high school music teacher for the rest of my life. That's not a dig against high school music teachers. But I was looking at the potential career opportunities, and IT presented the most options at the time. So I entered the IT career space right in college, began a career in consulting, and spent the first 15 years of my career in consulting. And after, I don't know, I kind of joke and laugh about myself. You hear people talk about the 7-year burnout periods. I think I probably went through about 2 of those before I realized maybe I should look for something a little beyond consulting. And that part of my career journey took me from consulting into internal IT leadership seats. And I think that's an interesting transition. A lot of times, when we're talking about IT, dealing with experts in the IT space, I often see folks move from internal seats where they developed a wealth of knowledge, maybe a deep well to draw on of expertise, then becoming consultants. But my career journey was reversed, where I spent the first 15 years as a consultant, then moving internal. And so that brought some interesting self and professional reflection. Once I found myself sitting at internal tables, leading internal teams, leading internal strategy, leading all of those internal things, and really fully owning what technology leadership needs to look like for an organization. And that really began a much deeper dive into the non-technical aspects of IT, the non-technical things like team health, team leadership, self-leadership.
Yeah, being in consulting now, I know one of the things we talk about a lot around here is a client engages us and we do X amount of work, whatever that finish line looks like. And then about the time you get your vocabulary worked out and you get all the adoption things worked out and they're off and running, like that's the fun part, right? That's when you can take that foundation you built and really start building on it. And often that's the time we leave. Sometimes we come back around, or sometimes we'll stay engaged in some kind of fashion with them. But oftentimes as a consultant, you don't get to see the fruits of some of your work.
Yeah.
So I think what I hear you saying is when you're internal, like you're there for the long haul, you can see the ideation, you can see the conflict, you can see the fear, and you also are there long enough, hopefully, to see those things assuage. So,
yep. And it's interesting as well, because as a consultant or someone from a third party seat, you come in and a business can take what they want of your advice or consultation and implement some of it. But when you're fully owning all of the execution and the results internally, it requires a completely different presence and approach to it. And it's interesting. The reason I brought up the fact that I started as a musician and a creative is because that context is the context in which I learned to embrace the process of things. And then the consulting period of my career tended to focus on fast results, high output, a lot of different stuff. And it wasn't until I moved back to moved to internal seats that I really felt the ability to reconnect back with the process of things. A lot of people talk about the process of IT. How does an organization adopt new technology, change and transform and grow and educate, and train their users to adopt a new technology? And I think that's where a lot more of the creative process craftsmanship comes into play. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I've seen in that. It's not a formula. You can't go into any given organization and say A plus B equals C, because A's the people and the people are different. Maybe there's a different language, different culture, different units, whatever those things are. You have to adapt to those things. So you have to come in with a slightly different mindset when you're dealing with people versus technology. With technology, it's this server, it's this operating system, it's this much RAM, those kinds of things, and you kind of come straight at it. But when you're dealing with people, it's just a whole different bag of tricks you've got to learn to work through that. And some of that is in the execution phase, as you're saying.
And then after a couple different internal IT leadership positions, I found myself drawn to the people and team development side of things, specifically after walking through several different identity transformation processes myself to survive and lead and thrive in multiple different environments. And so after about 6 years of internal IT leadership, I decided this was the year 2026 to launch my own coaching practice where I can dedicate time specifically to helping develop leaders who are experts, were experts. And I say were in that they are still experts, but they also need to become leaders. And so now in my coaching practice, I'm on a mission to help experts become leaders by learning how to navigate the identity growth required to stay relevant in today's world and into the future.
I look forward to the transition here in the topic. I've seen companies who the leaders were solely made up of people that have more than 10 years of experience, and that no more qualifies them to be a leader than graduating kindergarten, right? You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't learn what that means in definition, if you don't learn what that means in the company culture, if you can't embrace corporate mottos and learn how to adapt all that knowledge, then you're not a very effective leader. So you used the word expert. I know that's intentional. So as you think about what that looks like, when you sit down with somebody, what does that conversation go like?
Yeah. As I have conversations with experts, I perceive experts to be people who have developed incredible depth of knowledge, really strong abilities to see and solve certain problems. And they tend to be the people that you call when you need a quick answer, you need an accurate answer, they're going to be trustworthy. I think we could probably spend the entire rest of this episode specifically defining what an expert is, right? But in some of the worlds that I came from, in the world that you exist in, businesses call consultants to help with projects because they want expertise, right? So I think there's also this framing of an expert is someone who has something that someone else doesn't have. And I know there's a lot more nuance than that, but that's often how it's represented. We're hiring this expert because they have something we don't have. So it often tends to be, from a business perspective, what's the value we can glean from the expert to build something, change something, to transform something, right? But if you think about being an expert from the expert's point of view, it's often someone who has done something for such a long time that it's become second nature to them. Whatever it is, they have learned to embody that way of thinking, that mindset, all of those things. And of course, in the business world, in the economy, it leads to all kinds of opportunity, right? There's all kinds of opportunity for experts to show up and provide value. From my own experience, I also know when you sit in expert type seats and people keep coming to you for expertise, it can also kind of form some unconscious identity hooks in you as you're the one who's paid to be an expert. You're the one who has the answers. You're the one who has the experience. You're the one who has all of these things. So I think it also, from an expert's point of view, touches on identity and how much of our identity we're allowing to get wrapped up in the label, framing, and packaging of being an expert. And so now that I'm in the coaching space, working with experts and leaders, it's just interesting to see how deep some of those hooks go for so many experts.
Yeah, man, you've said a couple of times in this, people have developed experiences and skill sets over a period of time. And one phrase that comes to mind a lot is second nature. Like, I've just done this. So you think of a mechanic that's changed oil, they've done it 100 times. If I go change mine and I do that every 3 months, I have to sit and think about it sometimes. What size socket is that, right? But if you've done enough of it, you just know. And the upside of that is you're generally more efficient. You're generally more accurate, right? You work through those things. The downside to that is if you're in a role like you're trying to grow out of and hire somebody, you're not going to remember to pass that expertise on.
Yeah.
Because there are details that you're no longer thinking about. So those create some challenges in an internal environment where you're an expert at a company, you're an employee of that company. And now the role you serve goes a little beyond that heads down expertise thing you've been doing. Now it's got to be bigger. So those opportunities can be unique to navigate.
Yeah, in the worlds that you and I often exist in, a consultant or an expert is brought in for one type of change. Maybe that is a software implementation, an integration, some major new development, a go live launch, all of those things. That's great. And yes, businesses need to rely on experts for that. But when you think about everything else that needs to happen, the training, the change management, the culture creation, maybe culture redefinition of things that are not healthy in a company's culture, that requires a completely different level of expertise. So I'm curious to even ask you, as you bring a change management and people approach to implementations, what are some of the ways that you have seen expertise in technology map to expertise dealing with people and change management?
You turn the tables on me here, Aaron. I think probably one of the more significant things is as an expert coming in on technology, I don't presume to be an expert on their people. Right. So I want to sit down and do a lot of listening. I want to talk about, and we do this in development too. Like typically when we sit down with a client and they give us requirements, they always tell us the happy path. It's what we call it in software, right? When I click this, I want this to happen. Okay. But there's a lot of environmental factors around that you don't always talk about, that clients rarely seem to think about until you're in UAT, and it's very expensive to go back and go, oh, but there's actually 18 other roads you could go down that we didn't tell you about. So on the people side of that, I try to get out in front early and have the conversation about what that's going to need to look like. At the time we're doing discovery, I want you thinking about training. I want you thinking about testing. I don't want you to bring yes people to training. I want you to bring detractors. I want you to bring people that are going to take a hard scrutinous eye because they're experts, even if it's in negativity, right? They are experts in their own right, and you want to get that buy-in. You only get one chance for that first impression. So I typically try to find the right people to engage with, get people nominated, and then I invest in those people. I spend time talking to them, not just about the project. I want to get to know them, develop a rapport, because then I'm going to pick up their idiosyncrasies, those little tendencies where I can see how we can leverage their skill. Like I may have 10 people I'm going to send out to go train. Like I'm training the trainers and they're going to go train the troops. Every one of them may do that different. And it's important to understand that audience before you really go any further with it. If you try to stick one formula on all 10 people, half of them are going to fail because those people are different. Their experiences are different.
Yep. I know in some experiences I've had in the past, when you bring experts to the table, a lot of good things happen, right? Take a large software implementation like I know you're familiar with. You've got your architects and your developers and strategists, everyone coming together as experts in primary software and implementation. You also have the client who is also an expert in their business. They know their industry, they know their vertical, they know their profit margins, they know what works in their environment. And so a lot of times I think there's a blind spot when you bring a lot of experts to the table is they think everyone here is an expert, this is going to succeed. But probably more times than not, I have seen that actually create blind spots because everyone is thinking they're operating in their expertise, but they really don't have the table large enough with enough experts at the table. Because coming back to an expert implementing software or solving a problem for a client, oftentimes the client needs to be asking the question, what needs to be true for this change to last? What needs to be true for us to take ownership of the outcomes. What needs to be true for us to take ownership of the results we get from this and work on those things as well. And those aren't afterthoughts. I know you and I know
Right.
this. Those
Yeah.
are not afterthoughts, but they also don't fall nicely within the expert label on being your software implementer expert or the business expert.
Yeah. I think consultancy brings a different cut in that it creates an urgency. It's kind of like having a lawyer on retainer, like you're paying an X amount for them to be there. But once you really call them up, the meter starts running and you get desperate and
Yep.
start hollering things out. And a lot of times we skip right past the why are we here? You've got a problem. You've called us in to help you solve it. But if you have to define what the problem is, then you don't have a standard by which to measure every requirement, every goal against. You also don't have a statement that you can carry out because inevitably you always get past that first tier of leadership and you start getting out into the rank and file, the field people, whatever those things are. You get out to them and they've not necessarily heard the why either. They just know that a bunch of meetings got stuck on their calendar. So if you don't at least start with ingratiating them to there's something in it for you, right? You have to align on the mission. And it starts with a why statement right up front. And that has to come from a sponsor, right? We talk about executive
Mhm.
sponsors all the time. They're expert in their own right. But if they're not loud and proud with that statement, then everything you do downstream at best is going to be going upstream trying to fight that resistance that just comes when change shows up.
It's interesting as I have conversations with experts who are now leading people, projects, or teams. A lot of the times, the problems that they encounter come from their own expertise, the biases that were created by being an expert. In fact, there are research studies that demonstrate chess players who were studied in a chess match were presented with a situation where there were multiple solves. One was an easy, obvious solve, and the other one was a hidden, more complicated solve. The chess players who considered themselves experts, as they did eye tracking on the players across the board, the experts kept revisiting the squares related to the easy solution. Meanwhile, they provided feedback that they were continuing to hunt for better solutions. And when the researchers redid the chessboard so that the easy solution was no longer an option, the chess players found the harder, more technically advanced solution more quickly. So I think it's a really interesting example of experts who are sure that they're an expert getting blinded by their own expertise when there is a better solution just beyond what they have been able to see so far. And so as I reflect on that and reflect on leaders bringing expertise into projects, it's a really interesting exploration to say what's beyond what you know. Could there be beyond this project or this idea or this solution that you're bringing to the table? So I'm curious what you experienced, if you've experienced any expertise blind spot or biases. How have you seen that play out in some of your work?
Yeah, I think 20 years ago, I wound up in a sales training, and the way the training was kicked off was don't do the show up and throw up pitch. We've all had these, right? They come to your house, they show up, they're experts at this thing, and they're not here to hear what you've got to say or what you need. They're just going to make their pitch. They're going to wind it up, throw it at you. If it sticks, great. If it don't, they move on to the next call. And they really taught us to slow down and ask questions and try and learn some of those things. And what that makes you do is you're not just running head on towards this thing that I think is my destination. Now we're on a journey together, right? And to me, I've always approached consulting or projects that way. Is I want you to feel better when I leave. Right. I'm sure a psychiatrist has a good word for that. But I just thoroughly enjoy working with people. I thoroughly enjoy if there's anything I can do to make your life better, whether it's in this project or something adjacent, so be it. So I always see the people side before I see the technical things, which may become its own problem if you go too far down that road. But yeah, I've seen folks who hired us because they want to change. But when you sit down and you talk about change, all they want to talk about is the way they used to do it. I'm like, okay, this goes back to that why statement. If you state we're changing because we can't grow, we can't buy any more companies, we can't hire any more people because blank. If you sit down and make that statement, now I can measure everything else you tell me against. Is it aiming at solving why? If it's not, then why are we talking about it? But again, it goes down to having that hard conversation. And the strange thing is I always told my team when I managed them here, the minute we get on the phone with a customer, you got to understand they're operating from a place of desperation. They didn't want to hire a consultant and write that check. They didn't want to, but they did, which means they're already in a place that's uncomfortable to them. So we've got to find a way to come in and see we're not sitting across the table. We're sitting next to you at the table, aiming at the problem. So there's a infinite number of examples, I'm sure, that go at it, but those are two that kind of stick in my mind of where knowing too much can be a problem if you don't go into it with the right attitude.
Yeah. Yeah. Something you mentioned there reminds me of the phrase that I think I've heard it attributed multiple places, but people don't want a half-inch drill bit. They want a half-inch hole.
Right.
And the
Good
drill
point.
bit is the
Yeah.
mechanism to get the hole, right? So,
Right.
when it comes back to software and experts and bringing in consultants, oftentimes the focus on the expert can miss what the client actually is looking for. Another interesting thought that I've seen come up in conversations with experts is around the three laws of performance. The first law of performance specifically mentioning that people's performance directly correlates to how situations occur to them. And this makes me think of a lot of software implementation projects.
Mhm.
Because when you think about a company culture and you think about what happens in the planning meetings, the water cooler conversations across all employee front lines of users using said solution, there's often a narrative that's already formed about what the current software's like and what some new software's like. And you'll have more project expertise to back this up. But every time I've done a software implementation project for any client or internal organization, there's always an element of the grass is greener on the other side.
Certainly.
And as that ties back to this law of performance, you'll get out of the software what you put into it. But being aware of what you're putting into it, you need to know from a company cultural standpoint, what's the language around everything that you're doing and how is that affecting how the new software or this implementation or the situation is occurring to the rest of your business. Because as that situation occurs to everyone is how their performance comes across. So your financial analyst who does not believe in automation being able to achieve anything is going to bring that bias to any potential future automation, right? Your frontline employee who doesn't trust IT or technology because they don't know how to navigate the apps on their phone, they're going to have that perception of software and apps.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what app you provide them, they're going to run it through, this is a negative, buggy part of my job, right? And so as I encourage experts, find out in your organizations, what is the reality created that's affecting how software implementation or change management occurs to your employees, and go solve those problems first, because then the software implementation actually becomes a necessary and inevitable next step, right?
Yeah,
If you
absolutely.
tie the new piece of software, the new implementation to the future outcomes that the company wants to achieve, then going through the change required to do it is necessary and it's invited rather than a forced change.
Yeah, the old statement, you can get them one of two ways, with a carrot or a stick,
Yeah.
right? We're talking about the proverbial carrot. And I, in my experience, a lot of projects that I've seen go on and long predating my time in Salesforce is at the end of the day, you're not spending this money because you want to, right? I don't want a half-inch drill bit. I don't need a collection of those, but I need a hole. And at the end of the day, I'm trying to do what's in the best interest of the company. So if it's in the best interest of the company, then it's in the best interest of every employee of the company, right? They're under my leadership. So if you don't take the time to engage that, people see that as like, why do I need to go beg my employees to get on board with this? At the end of the day, your company needs to be aligned, right? Would you knowingly do something that's going to segment your company? No. Okay. Then they need to be on board. And if you know that, I've heard a lot of different sayings, but the other is people prefer familiar and bad over new and good, because
Hmm.
familiar is familiar, right? Anything you can do to make me have to think less and make it easy to do my job, I'm going to be a fan of. But if it's better, then all you got to do is clear a runway so I can see that. I need to buy into your vision. So yeah, there's 1,000 synonyms or whatever we could throw at that, I'm sure, but definitely have seen that plenty of times.
Yeah. There's another area where I think expertise can sometimes become an unintentional blind spot. And it's that oftentimes people use uniqueness and being an expert in what they know as a smokescreen for coming out of integrity. And so, what I mean by that is, again, there has been research studying how people respond to different situations. And there's a common theme of people responding to situations liking to feel that they're unique, we survived the pandemic because XYZ. We had all of these pre-planned things in play. Maybe we're too far away from the pandemic now. I can't believe it's 2026 and everyone still has a before and after pandemic story. But then, every time something goes right or wrong in business, the business experts often think it was because of their uniqueness. So there tends to be an over bias on thinking your own uniqueness contributed to the success or the failure. And that right there is one of the ways that being an expert can short circuit your ability to think outside the box. Because if you think about an organization that really needs and wants a transformative change to be able to meet their 3 or 10-year vision, they're most likely going to have to do things that they've never done before. But, the longer a business stays in business, the longer an expert occupies a seat, the more confident you become in what you have always done has gotten results, right? And so thinking about that now in the coaching space, I have conversations with leaders who over rely on their uniqueness as being a success factor for the future, or they over rely on their uniqueness for weathering a negative situation. And so I think it's interesting to bring that discovery to a leader's mind of helping them identify where they might be getting stuck or getting in their own way when it comes to considering their own uniqueness. I'm sure you probably have some stories around that as well.
Well, I think this ties back to something you said earlier. I was trying to follow along there to make sure I was tracking the language. You mentioned that uniqueness can be when we come out of integrity. I was trying to understand that phrase, and what I think you meant, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you want to believe that everybody shows up in the room. I think as a consultant, it's harder because you're into a room of people you don't know their background. You want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're coming to the room with the best of intentions, aligned on the mission to help get to a good, solid end, whatever the why statement is, right? And if you're wrong about that they're tolerating the meeting, they're showing up, and they're going to tout their expertise and all the things they know. But if they're not aligned on the mission, then they're no longer operating out of a place of integrity. They're operating out of a place of selfishness, right? That expertise is actually more important than contributing to this whatever this change may look like. So this is why we started by talking about the people side of things. If you don't make sure the people are aligned, then everything you do downstream is going to be scrambling to kind of herd the cats up and try to keep them on board with the current focus. But I think we've all seen that. There's always detractors in the midst. But this is, I think, why I've inadvertently always kind of gone out to the people, because I just have found success when people are not genuine, when they're not operating in a place of integrity. It's usually pretty easy to determine that. Maybe expensive, but within 2 or 3 meetings, you're going to know what kind of attitude you're getting. Kind of a thing. Are they coming with good questions? Are they stepping outside of the script and saying, "Hey, I had an idea. I was thinking about this last night." Like, genuine excitement is alignment. But to your point, if they show up looking for a problem, they're probably going to find one.
Yeah. And I think to that, I would say you're absolutely right. I'm thinking of integrity simply as the workability of a system or a thing. And so when people fall out of integrity, it's because they were letting their own need to be right, to be safe, to look good in comparison with the rest of the team, overstep the needs of the system working. And, if integrity is the workability of a thing, then the success of the system that you're building is paramount, right? But when an expert brings their uniqueness and they over-index on bringing their uniqueness to the situation, suddenly you've just inserted a competing factor for the success of the outcome, because it's no longer the success of the business outcome. It's now, is this going to make the expert look and feel as good as they want in the moment?
Yeah. Maybe we'd spend all our time redefining words. It'd be a little easier to navigate vocabulary these days. But yeah, I've always kind of thought about the ambassador role. I don't know what this term struck me 25 years ago. If I'm an American and I go anywhere overseas and I step into an embassy, I expect to meet an ambassador. An ambassador is a representation of the place they come from. So I should reasonably be able to kind of infer what is it like there by the experience I'm having here with that ambassador. I always have thought about stakeholders kind of that way. Like, there are experts, there's ambassadors of parts of your business process out there. And if you're operating from integrity, if you're being a good ambassador for your people group, you're representing them. Governance by committee, right? You're just coming in to bring that. And as long as you're authentic to that, then the chance of both of our successes goes up. But the minute you step away from that and that becomes self-serving, you're no longer on the mission focus and we're doomed, right? That's a very difficult thing to overcome, because it generally doesn't become painfully obvious until way late. And again, I think consulting's a little different because there's a timeline and a budget element that Not that you don't have that internally, but the constraints of it are a little different when there's third party. So,
Yeah, yeah. And I think you say something important there about stepping in from the future, learning from someone who's been there.
mhm.
And I want to point out that that also ties back to the third law of performance, which is that future based language transforms how situations occur to people. So, we mentioned earlier people's performance is directly correlated to how situations occur to them. Well, the answer to that is using future based language. And I know every leader listening to this is like, this is why we have a company vision. Like, and I say that
Yeah.
somewhat sarcastically, but also, yes, that is why you have a company vision. But because language is so powerful there, understanding the blind spots and the biases of being an expert, then curating the language that you're using to describe both your company vision. Maybe it's just the vision for what this implemented software looks like. Maybe it's the outcomes that you want from having the software already implemented. That's how you effectively change culture,
Mhm.
right? You need the future based language to be able to galvanize your team and change how the change management process occurs to everyone going through the process. Because you and I know it's not comfortable to go through that kind of change. It's not easy to go through the organizational transformation required to fully bring in a whole new software suite or app. Especially with AI, there's a lot of friction now.
Exactly.
How are companies bringing in AI to gain efficiency? Part of the reason that's so difficult for companies right now is there's a lot of language on what that new future could look like.
Mhm.
And that language hasn't really been clarified or solidified. So, yeah, I think it's really important to know that what we create now, what we do now needs to come from a place of having a clear vision for the future.
Yeah, we have this conversation internally all the time on the AI topic, right? If you take any given company out there, if they just put out a statement, we're going to do this AI project, I'd be willing to bet 70 to 85% of the employees that hear that is, crap, am I going to lose my job? Right? That's personal, but it's real, right? If you're going to have a statement like that out there, to your point, part of stating that we're going to do AI is you need to cast a vision what our company with AI looks like in the future, right? If you want people to show up, like this just wraps all that up in a bow.
Hmm.
If you want people to show up, let's say we're going to make an AI assistant who hasn't sat at their desk at some point and said, if there was just more of me, if I had a clone that I could put this work on, imagine what I could get done. Well, the excuse is gone. Now AI can do some of that stuff. But if you want me to show up with integrity and be honest about what I do so that agent can learn it, so I can hand that off and start doing more valuable things, you've got to get me to buy into the vision that when I do that, I'm not gone, right? That I haven't just
Yep.
coached myself out of a job. So, I mean, that's a really practical example about scaling, about leadership, about expertise, that if you want me to bring my expertise to the table, I need to have a statement I can buy into. I mean, any company over 10 people, no one person has all that knowledge, right? So you got to rely on one another, but that has to operate with a place of transparency and trust. So to your point, like, yeah, that experience, that vision definitely has to be a line defined and agreed upon before you really even get technical with anything, because everything else you do downstream is going to be tainted if you don't.
Yep. You make me think of two things. I'm pretty sure all of our listeners, readers here today have seen the headlines about massive layoffs,
Mhm.
4,000, 6,000 employees laid off because of AI. I wonder how many have also seen IKEA's headline. IKEA shifted all their customer service over to AI agents, retrained the customer service staff, and have added over 1 trillion to their bottom line. So I think there's two ways that this can play out. Companies often see implementing AI making reductions, or they can implement new solutions and retrain, reskill employees and add to the bottom line. So I don't think efficiency is just about saving money. It needs to also be paired with finding ways to engage those people in new ways to add to the bottom line. And so we've talked about some of the blind spots and biases of experts and how that presents in the organizations. I think the other side of that is the expert as an individual. What are they thinking right now? They're thinking, am I going to get replaced? If I participate in this implementation, am I irrelevant?
Right.
Who am I if AI just outsourced all of my expertise? So I think what's at stake for expert based leaders is an identity crisis of who am I now that I'm no longer the expert X, Y, or Z. And that, I think, is the area where having powerful future-based language is going to be important for staying relevant in the workforce. So I encourage individual leaders on the individual level, forgetting everything that's going on in the economy, in the business world. What's the vision that you have for your life that allows you to approach all of this rapid change and development and growth in a way that it's not jeopardizing your identity?
Yeah. We've seen this, and I know enough about your background. I know you've sat in these kinds of meetings of the yeah buts, right? When we talked about the happy path earlier, you can go, all right, well, I'll just go build a program that does this. And they go, yeah, but what about inevitably? I'm just trying to do kind of a use case to help people relate to this topic. Inevitably, my experience, my expertise tells me that 80% of the time it's going to be that happy path. But the other 20% of the time, it's not two things that could go wrong or be variables. It might be 70 things. In AI world, we call this human in the loop, right? If 80% of the time it always goes one way, then that's what your program ought to do. But if it's part of that 20%, instead of having a person handle something that's very monotonous 80% of the time, now they can focus on a higher quality experience on that 20% of the time, what we might call a VIP or a white glove or whatever. There's a lot of words that go to that, but it basically says something that you do 80% of the time, the exact same time, every time, no challenge, is going to get boring, right? So take the monotony out and let me go focus on what's really impactful. A client who is otherwise would have had a bumpy, I dialed this number, press 1, press 7, press 3, press 2. Is there a human anywhere out here? Right? You want to heighten that experience. So to your point, you may have to scramble a little bit to look across the landscape of the things you do to say, I'm expert at a lot of things. Some of these could be replaced, but what are some things that I can uniquely do to complement a process? So now my expertise is not only something that's my workload went down 80%, but the gratification of the remaining 20% does more to bottom line. Now I'm building loyalty. Now I'm building brand love or whatever. Like, put your favorite influencer term in there, right? But yeah, I mean, we see this every day in the AI world of this conversation of people fearful that you're going to automate yourself out of a job. Our nation has been through this many, many times before. This is another journey. The world's not going to end when AI comes out here as long as we don't let it take over, right? Those are really, really good points, Aaron. And obviously speaking through a long culture of what you learned in consulting and what you learned internally at a company, that the people side of these things have to be navigated. And to the people that are on the receiving end of that, maybe you're not the owner of the company or in the C-suite, you're somebody out there just wondering what the future is going to look like for you. If you've been at that company a year, you've got your own expertise. You've proven your value that you're still there. So there's a method, there's a process to go discover that new value you have and how to capitalize on that, maybe is a better way of saying it. And I think in today's business culture, there's a tendency to make that sound or feel opportunistic, that everybody's got to be an influencer, everybody's got to have a podcast, everybody's right. You don't have to have a podcast to go about your expertise, right? This world revolves on people that just show up and do their job every day. You've used the word identity a couple of times. And again, in today's world, that means so many different things. But if I'm somebody who shows up at work and my identity is this task, let's just stay with that example, 80% of what I was doing is going to be replaced. That makes me feel like 80% of my life, my identity, my work identity is now gone, or at least it's not me. How can somebody look to determine, if there are hidden needs in that identity? How do you begin identifying that for yourself?
Yeah, the good place to start is looking at where you're feeling stretched beyond what you knew. Maybe you're feeling pain or frustration, and then using that as the signal to investigate your beliefs or your mental models around whatever that thing is. And I'll give you one quick example here. This example comes from research by 𝗔𝗿𝗄𝘅 that Adam Grant and Brene Brown were discussing on their podcast. And they were talking about mental models and how easy it is for people to develop those. And this one might be relevant for your audience. But 𝗔𝗿𝗄𝘅 had studied people who had transitioned out of the military. And oftentimes the mental models that they have groups military good, non-military bad. Maybe it's not good, bad. Maybe it's ideal and non-ideal. But people who completely thrived in the military found their lives falling apart, or at least feeling like they were falling apart once they stepped out. And neither reality is more right or wrong or good or bad than the other. What was out of date was their mental models. So
Mhm.
if they were used to approaching a situation a certain way in the military, needing to adapt that to regular civilian life is internal work that they have to do. And likewise, for the leader who's looking at the 80% of their job description responsibilities potentially getting outsourced, their mental models might be, I need to feel seen, valued, heard, and feel like I'm contributing to this company. Therefore, AI that's jeopardizing that is bad, right? Oftentimes, those mental models end up being overly simplistic polarizations, good,
Mhm.
bad, yes, no, ideal, not ideal. And so when someone feels those kinds of triggers, that's the invitation to start exploring what are your beliefs about that and how can you change that? Because tying back to that law of performance, how you perform through this season of change and transformation directly correlates to how that transformation occurs to you. So change your mindset and you can change how those occur to you. And as you change how situations occur to you, you can continue to stay engaged in the process. If AI eliminated 80% of my job description, I'd be really happy because that's an invitation
Yeah.
into exploring the other human sides of things, right? So that's, I think, my encouragement for experts and leaders is what new future is becoming possible because of this today.
Yeah. Again, playing that example out. We've all probably sat in a job, and I'm glad you went at that the way you did. Like, where's an area you feel stressed? So let's say I'm in customer service, right? And I take 50 calls a day, but 60 calls are coming in. What does that mean? The last 10 calls a day don't get answered, or I cut every call short, meaning I don't service properly my existing clients in order to take those other
Hmm.
10, or we hire somebody to take on that additional load. Well, that last one is the hardest thing to do because it's one, I got to spend money. I got to train them. I got to give them benefits. I've got to help them learn the company motto. I got to get them to buy into the vision. I got to do all this stuff. But if they're only taking 10 calls, I'm probably not hiring them 2 hours a week. I'm giving them a full-time job, right? That growth is expensive. It's hard. It's tumultuous. There's a lot that goes into it. But think of it this way. This might be a way that 80% of the headaches that you currently get are no longer there. Now you're scaling without hiring anybody else. If you'll take the time to help pass your expertise into the model, your meta model, as I was trying to make sure I was following the
Hmm.
lingo there, your meta model is the process by which you would digest what's going on, right?
Correct.
Your bias, your experience, whatever that might be. If every time they talk change, it sucks, then I'm going to come with a bad attitude to every project, even if it's
Yep.
going to make my life better. So my mental model needs to change to, look, I'm sitting here stressed out. Maybe I need to raise my hand and say, hey, this might be a good opportunity for us to streamline some things. Like I've just paid attention that of the 50 calls a day that I take, 40 of them look like this. Is there a way that we can streamline this a little bit? Can I, like, when it starts, can I go click and an agent takes over and does that? Like, that's a great example where
Hmm.
you can, I mean, the juice is definitely worth the squeeze. And now you can spend your time focusing on other things and you're recognized as a person who sees this. So to your point, I can take my expertise, my experience, my breadth of knowledge of what goes on, because I guarantee the people at the top don't know anything about these calls. They know what a categorization, they know a stat and an average call time, but they don't know the meat and potatoes of what goes on these. So you have that expertise, you have that power. Just spend some time thinking about that and look for that area where the stress is just pulling. And that's an area that needs work. And therefore, this might be a way for your expertise to shine.
Yep. And using the example of that call center person, their job technically isn't to answer the phone. Their job is to solve customer problems, right? And there's a lot of different ways they can continue to solve customer problems, even if a lot of the phone answering stuff is automated or streamlined or drastically reduced. So I think that's a really easy, concise way to think about that. What are your real responsibilities? And there is still opportunity to do that.
Fantastic. Aaron, there's a lot behind all of this. I know, and at the end of the day, no two people, no two experiences, no two piles of expertise are going to look or feel the same. But
And you can never
certainly
separate the business side of things with the human side of things.
100%, 100%.
Because business is comprised of humans, there's always going to be a deep intertwined nature of the humans in business.
Yeah.
And so those are the conversations that I love to have.
So I want to leave kind of some cliffhangers here because inevitably I can see people wanting to reach out saying, I've got questions and I don't know where to start. You talked about kind of feeling trapped or feeling stressed, those kinds of things, then I'm sure that brings up a certain kind of feeling for a lot of our audience, right? Who doesn't want their job to be a little easier? Who doesn't want the monotonous part of your job to go away? Who doesn't want the things that you're doing to feel more valuable, not just to your employer, but to you?
Mm-hmm.
So I am sure there are things that are resistors, right? Well, Aaron and Greg just said, if I can go show them this, then my job's going to get better. Well, there's a lot of ingredients in this cake that have to be baked out. So some fears that might come up with people is, how will I know if doing this is not going to eliminate my job? Obviously, that's not a question we can directly answer because your experience is going to be different. But how do you make up what is happening? Are you open to challenging the mindsets with what you know to be true with research? The good thing about research is it's taking a pretty wide skill set experiences into play. So these are things that you've got to ultimately figure out how to apply to your scenario, your job. Maybe it's not all job. Maybe it's just how you manage your personal schedule. People have agents for that now too, believe it or not. If somebody want to engage with you to kind of begin that conversation, because I can just see it going 1,000 ways and we can't begin to give all the on-ramps at the close of an episode here to that. But what's the best way for somebody to engage you to start having that conversation?
Yeah, a lot of folks can just find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to respond to messages there. You can find my website at 𝗪𝗁𝗄𝗃𝗁.com. And again, the conversations that I love to have are the conversations with experts and leaders who are trying to stay relevant and healthy in today's culture.
Fantastic. We will put all those links in the show notes. So wherever you're watching or listening to this, you can look into the description area of that episode and you'll find links to Aaron's LinkedIn page and his website. I believe there's an assessment that you mentioned that they can take.
As a value add for anyone who's listening to this, if you want to go a little deeper on the personal side and see what might be influencing your leadership in known and unknown ways, I've got an assessment on my website that might help identify some of the underlying drivers, mainly 7 questions that you might be asking to be true in your life and leadership. This can help discover those and then create some really interesting conversations.
And I think it's really surprising to people how many times those unconscious questions are radically affecting how you do everything every day. I'm guilty of it myself. You have to do a lot of intentional work to kind of change your mental models when it comes to some of those things. But sometimes it's being honest about answering one question can change your success on how you do your job. And you don't know what door that's going to open. So, man, I really appreciate you taking time today. It is an interesting journey. We talked a lot about software implementations, using that as kind of a case, because it's what we do here at Sirius. I know you've got some background in that as well. But I really want to highlight the people side, because while you may not be doing software or anything like that at your company, a company that's not changing today is dying, right? AI is going to disrupt your company. So there's a lot that we can learn from this, but the people side of it, what makes you unique, what makes you an expert is the human part of you and your experience. And AI can't replace that. It can learn certain things, but inevitably there's almost no company out there that does things that doesn't require a human at some point. So this is about leveraging the things you know in a most beneficial way to your company and to yourself. So I hope you'll take time to go look at Aaron's website, connect with him on LinkedIn. He's a fantastic guy I've known for years, really easy to talk to. But if you don't do anything else, go do the assessment. Have an honest conversation with yourself. Who doesn't like talking to themselves? Right? But I appreciate you making time
every
for me
day
today.
anyway.
Yeah, I call him Claude. I talk to him all the time. But I appreciate you coming here today, Aaron. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing some of this expertise about expertise. The older I get, the more I realize I don't know. So it's good to hear it, man.
Likewise.
But thanks for the time
It's good
today.
to be here, Greg. Thanks, Greg.
Appreciate it. Take care. Thank you for listening to Serious Talk, Salesforce at Scale. Aaron, thank you for this one. You took something every implementer feels, but rarely names, the gap between knowing the platform and leading the people on it. And you gave us language to go with that. The line that stayed with me is simple. Your job was never to answer the phone. It was to solve the problem. When AI takes the monotony, your expertise does not disappear. It moves to the work that actually matters. That reframe, expert to leader, is the whole episode. So here's the ask. If you're an admin, an architect, or a delivery lead staring at a change that scares you, share this with one person on your team who is quietly wondering whether they are about to be automated out of a seat. Then go take Aaron's assessment and have an honest conversation with yourself about the questions driving your work. If this was useful, follow the show. Leave a quick review so other practitioners can find it. Full show notes, Aaron's LinkedIn, and his website are in the episode description. A sincere thank you goes out to Jason Fowler for allowing use of his song, Mystery Road. If you have questions or a guest idea, reach out to us at SeriousTalk@SeriousSolutions.com. The address will also be in the show notes. Until next time, stop protecting what you know, find ways to leverage and capitalize on your experience, and intentionally lead where it counts.